Hello, I'm David Singleton, and this is a video which will hopefully explain to you the joys of the new elemental mixes that we have done for the 50th anniversary of Larks Tongues. These mixes have an entirely different approach to a conventional mix, and as with many new creative ideas, they have come around entirely by accident. They're in fact a product of the various session mixes that we've been doing as the albums reach their 50th anniversary. So what we've been doing is we've been going back and we've been releasing all the recordings that were done in the studio, the entire session recordings. And our approach for those recordings has been to unmix them. So normally you put the album, you would put the various elements of a mix together in a conventional way. You'd have the bass and the drums, the guitars, the voice mixed together in the perfect blend that you would want on a final recording. Whereas with the session recordings, we've tried to keep the various parts as apart as we possibly can, so that it's not like listening to a blended mix. It's more like perhaps sitting in the studio with the various musicians sitting around you. So we've used very, very wide stereo, for example. So if there's only two musicians, we would probably put the guitar fully on the right, and then the violin, for example, fully on the left, or the drums perhaps in the middle, so that everybody is as separate as we can possibly get them. And we're not balancing them in what you might think of as a correct balance. We're simply putting them together as if you were sitting in the room with them. And more especially if there's a part that's unusual that normally would be hidden in the background, we would often turn that part up louder. So perhaps it's almost like an upside down mix would be another way of hearing it. And so we've done that for every single recording that the band did when recording the album Larks Tongues. And I have here the final recordings that they did, the ones that were actually used on the album. And if we look at this, you will see that Larks Tongues, this is Larks Tongues Part 1. Larks Tongues Part 1, they didn't in fact play the whole piece all in one go. It was actually recorded in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different sections. So the first section here, for example, is the introduction. This is a part that was never used. That sounds more similar to a different mix, but that's a more similar part. Then you move forward to this section. And you can see here that there are actually 1, 2, 3, there are 4 different sessions that were done to do this. So the first one, for example, the one in purple, there, that's the bass and the drums. Then after that, you have the guitars added with the violin. And after that, in fact, you have the solo guitar that goes over the top. And those we prepared as 3 different takes in effect. So you had the bass and the drums, then the guitar and the violin, then the solo guitar that Robert overdubbed. And the elemental mix is simply created by mixing those 3 together. And we can work our way through the track. You then get the 7/8 section, if I can count correctly. And similarly, the part in purple is just the bass and the drums. The one underneath is the take of the guitar, and you add those 2 takes together. I mentioned earlier that there were lots of takes, so in many cases there are parts that would never appeared on the final album. If we come to the next section, there are 4 takes in orange. They're all guitar solos. So what we have here, this is the 4/4 section that follows. So again, we have the bass and the drums down here, I think. Wonderful clatter of Jamie Muir then. But all of the parts above are different guitar solos. So Robert, in fact, did 4 takes of guitar solo. So, for example, if you listen here, we've actually got 2 running at the same time. So that's one guitar solo. Down here is another guitar solo. And in many cases, none of these appeared on the final album, but we've combined all these various sessions. So here, we start to get an entirely new version. And it's wonderful because you're hearing something that's very familiar, but is also entirely new. These are parts that you've never heard before. The central section is called the intermezzo. And the second section of this, which was David Cross and Jamie Muir, there were lots and lots of takes of this. And this, in fact, isn't the take that appeared on the album. This is a completely different take that we've used. Through to the final section of the album, the piece. A fun part of this is that there is a take just of Bill Bruford reading the newspaper. And the intention is that you can hear someone mumbling in the background. And the fun little thing to notice is that at the very end, Bill stops reading the newspaper and says, "Mumble, mumble." I think we can hear it here. So there you end up with a brand new version of Larks Tongues Part 1. We did 4 elemental mixes in total. We did Larks 1, Larks 2, Easy Money and the talking drum. The next one I have up here is Larks 2. This one's only got 2 takes. It has the backing track and then the overdubs on top. The backing track is again in purple. In this case, it's just Robert, Bill Bruford and John Wetton. And then we have the overdubs. I remember Robert saying that he didn't think anyone enjoyed hitting drums as much as Pat Mastalotto. I think listening to Jamie Muir here, he certainly runs him close. So again, these 2 parts were prepared separately as 2 different takes, and the elemental mix is created by combining the 2 of them. A new way of seeing Larks 2. It again features some parts that they never used. There were a large number of violin solos. And we've used more than one of them. fact, at the end of the piece, as a form of coda, we've combined all the violin solos, so we get this effect. And finally, we can have a quick look at the talking drum. Again, we have the backing track, which is in purple, which is bass guitar and drums. In the same way, they've been panned separately, so the bass, which would always be in the middle, is not in the middle, it's on the left. And then the other take is the overdubs. And the fascinating thing again is if you combine these two, you end up with a completely different version of the talking drum. So those are the elemental mixes, which are a wonderful way of hearing something very familiar in a new way.